Hey everybody, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do the flat braid continuous join for joining your Unicorn Dreams blanket squares. If this is your first visit to my channel, it would be amazing if you just took a moment to hit that subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss out on any of my future crochet videos. Now for the flat braid continuous join, I am going to be demonstrating over 6 squares, and that's because they are pretty big squares. And if I was to go really slowly and do 9 squares, we would be here all day. Now it is 100% worth your time to grab the free written PDF copy of this join and the border, which will be the next video. It's available on Lisa's website, Cute Crochet Makes, which I've linked to in the description box below. Working with white is not always the easiest to see, so if you have the written pattern and me talking you through it and the visuals, you should be able to nail this join pretty quickly. Now the flat braid continuous join in this video starts from the very top row of your blanket and works the way down. So before you start, if you're at the point where you've got all your squares and you are ready to join, lay them all out in order of how you want them joined in the overall blanket. And just bear in mind, we're working from the very top row of the blanket down. Now the flat braid continuous join is incredibly forgiving. In this video, I show you what you do when you haven't got enough stitches, this square, guilty as charged, or what you do when you have too many stitches, this square, guilty as charged, and how it all works out. And in the overall scheme of blanket, you will not notice slight varying stitch counts of your squares. You're also not going to notice size discrepancies either. So some of my squares are larger than others. It really doesn't matter once everything is joined. So lay out your squares in advance, grab the very top row of your blanket, and we are going to be joining this square across and then attaching the bottom ones, always working from this side across. So grab your hook, grab your yarn, and let's go. So I'm going to be demonstrating the continuous flat braid join over 6 squares. Now these squares are pretty big squares. So normally for my continuous join as you go videos, I use smaller squares, but I wanted to show you on the actual Unicorn Dreams blanket squares how to do the joining, hence why I'm only going to be doing it over 6 squares. Now the premise for joining your squares, we are going to be starting at the top corner, very top corner over here. I'm going to join along this side, then join to this daisy square, up and around, then over to the cloud square, up and around, and then we're going to pick up the bottom row of all those squares. Then again on this bow square, down and around, up over the heart square, down and around over the rose square, and then for the very end, so you would keep repeating this for as big or as wide as your blanket is, and then when you've reached this bottom corner at the very bottom edge of your blanket, you pick up all the way along here. Sorry, it's really hard to keep in shot. And then you join right back up to the top. So take a mental note of which squares are where, because I'm going to zoom right in down here so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so the flat braid continuous join, I'm going to be using a 4mm crochet hook and my white yarn. Now on my first square, what you want to do is you want to find your chain space. Now it doesn't matter which square you start with. I just picked 6 squares at random, and I'm hoping they have slightly different stitch counts so I can show you how you can adapt this method if you don't have exactly the same stitch count on every single square, because it is very forgiving and you can fudge it as you go and it will still look amazing out the other side. So find your chain space, and we're going to be joining to the very first stitch after your chain space. So this is my chain space here. So I want to join my yarn to the very first stitch after the chain space. So I'm going to pop a slip knot onto my hook. And I'm going to pull that loop through to the front of my work. So to start, I'm going to chain 4, which counts as a single crochet, and chain 3. So I've got my first chain 4. Now skip the next stitch and single crochet into the one after that. So you form a little loop. Chain 3, skip a stitch, single crochet into the next. So we're going to do this all the way along this top edge of the square. Chain 3, skip a stitch, single crochet in the next. So we want 13 of these chain loops across the top before you get to this chain space over here. Now, if you find that you are running out of room for all 13 loops, you can not skip a stitch towards the end if you need extra loops, or if you find you have too many stitches left over with your 13 loops, you can maybe skip 2. You just want to fudge it a little so that you have 13 chain 3 loops. So 13 of these. So don't worry too much, just try to evenly space these loops apart. So I'm ending in that very last stitch along the top, and this is the moment of truth. Do I have 13 chain loops? Okay, so I've got 13. It's going to be this magic number 13 for every side of your squares. As I said, if you've reached this point and you've only got 12, then undo a few and maybe pop in one where you haven't skipped a stitch to force in another little chain loop. Or if you've got too many and you've got 14 or 15, then just skip a couple of extra stitches just to bring that count in line to 13. 13 is a magic number that you want for joining these Unicorn Dreams blanket squares. So once you have 13 chain loops, to go around the corner, we're going to chain 5. Skip this chain space in here, and exactly the same as before, single crochet into that very first stitch, chain 3, skip a stitch, single crochet into the next, and work your way down this side for 13 chain loops. Ignore your chain 5, 13 of these chain 3 loops. This is my very last stitch. Double check you have 13. So now you're good to bring in the next square that you're joining. So for me, it's the daisy square. So I'm just bringing in the daisy square so I'm ready to join. So I have done 2 sides of my very first rainbow square, and now I'm joining to the daisy square. I'm going to show you this side up close, then I will pan up a little bit so you can see the sort of blanket a bit more clearly coming together. So once you are ready to join to your next square, chain 5. And you're going to put a single crochet into the very first stitch after the chain space. So here's my chain space. They're quite small and tiny and hard to see. There's my chain space. I'm going to put a single crochet into the very first single crochet of my daisy square. Oops, like that. I'm just going to rotate everything slightly. Now you're going to chain 1, take that loop off your hook and hang on to it with your hands. Pop your hook underneath the corresponding chain 3 space on your rainbow square. Pop that loop back on your hook, bring it through the chain 3 and chain 2. Skip a stitch, single crochet. Now I'll try to show you because I know white is difficult. Chain 1, remove your hook, put it underneath the chain 3 loop on the square next to it, pull that through, chain 2. Skip a stitch, single crochet. So you're joining them, the chain 3 loops together. Chain 1, remove your hook, put it under the chain 3 space, put that loop back on your hook, come through that chain 3 space, chain 2. Skip a stitch, single crochet. So you're going to do that all the way up these sides, joining the 13 loops together. Chain 1, remove your hook, put it under the next chain 3 loop, put your hook back onto that loop, or the loop back onto your hook, pull it through, chain 2, skip a stitch, single crochet. Now for this one, I don't have enough stitches to skip one for this final connecting of the loop. So I just want to make sure I haven't miscounted and I have in fact got 13. Okay, so this would be my 13th. So because I don't have any more stitches to skip before this chain space, I'm just going to pop a single crochet in here. So you can see you don't really notice that I haven't skipped a stitch here to make room for all 13 chain loops. So now I am at the corner section for the top of my blanket. So I'm going to chain 3, remove my hook and put it underneath this chain 5 corner loop. Pull it through, chain 3, and then place that single crochet into the single crochet after your chain space. So just as you did here, we're sort of skipping the chain space with a chain 5 around it. I'm doing exactly the same on this section here. So you're going to continue this for as wide as your first row, your top row of your blanket is. So I'm going to carry on, and you can use this one as your reference. So 13 across the top, single crochets with chain 3, chain 5 around that corner section. So single crochet, the one you end on, chain 5, and then restart your single crochet, chain 3 loops in that second stitch. So you're going to be doing this all the way around. So going up your next square and joining it across the top, chain 5, come back down to this point. Then you're going to rejoin your next square, which I've got one more square, so I will show you the joining part again. But I'm just going to whiz around this section with my chain 5 bits here, making sure I have 13 chain loops on each side. Again, for this one, I don't have enough room. So I'm one stitch shy on this one for each one, so I'm not skipping a stitch. And I'm just putting that final chain 3 loop right next to each other. So chain 5 to go around the corner, and then rejoin into the first single crochet after your chain space. All right, so I have gone round my daisy square, round 3 sides. Now it's time to bring in my very next square, and this is what you would repeat for the full width of the first row. So chain 5, and join to the very first single crochet after the chain space on your next square. Then, just like we did over here, chain 1, remove your hook, pop it underneath the first chain 3 loop, pop your hook, loop back on your hook, pull it through, chain 2, skip a stitch, single crochet. Once you reach the very last joined chain 3 loop, chain 3, Pop your hook into the chain 5 loop on the corner, pull that loop through, chain 3, secure with a single crochet in the first single crochet after your chain space, and then continue just as you have been, going around the next 2 sides, join to the next square, up, along, down, join to the next square, keep going for the full width of your very first row. So once you have joined the full width of the very first top row of your blanket, you want to bring in the next row for attaching. Okay, so this is the very first row, which yours of course will be wider. So you've got 2 raw edges here, and you've gone up and around, up and around, up and around for the full width. Now bring in your next row, and we're going to work along the bottom edge of these squares that you've already joined. Then we're going to bring in this second row here. So just be mindful of what square comes next, because we're just going to whiz along this little bit and then pick up the next row. So I'm going to rotate everything around so that it's easier for me to work on this bottom row. So I'm just going to move these 3 for a moment. I'm going to spin this entire thing around whilst we work along the bottom edge. So I've finished this final side here, and we're ready to pick up along the bottom. So to turn the sort of corner, so to speak, we're going to chain 5. And just as you have been doing, skip that chain space, single crochet in the first single crochet after it, and we're going to continue our chain loops that we've been doing, the 13 chain 3 loops along the bottom. As always, just double check you have 13. And now as we work along the bottom, we're going to be picking up this chain 5 loop here. So the chain 5 you made when you connected one square to the new square, this is what we're going to be working into along this bottom pickup row. So chain 3, take your hook, loop off your hook, put your hook through this chain 5, put the loop back on your hook, pull it through, chain 3. So you've connected to this chain 5 loop. Then skip your chain space of your square itself and work into that very first single crochet. And continue with your chain 3 loops along the bottom. So chain 3 loops all along the bottom, and then when you get to your joined chain 5 here, chain 3, pop your hook into that chain 5 loop, draw the loop through, chain 3, and then continue working along. So that's my final square of the row. 13. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate everything around 180 degrees, because now I'm going to be joining to my next squares in the row. So again, I've panned up slightly so you can see where we are at. So we started up here, down and around, joining, and now we've just come along the bottom, picking up these loops, and we're right back over here ready to begin your next row. Now you'll see I've got quite a bit of frilling going on. I didn't block my squares before doing the joining. So once this is finished, I can block the entire blanket, which will pull out that lacy design too, and any discrepancy in size of my squares. So this one you can see is pulling in a little bit because it's a bit smaller. It really doesn't matter because this is an incredibly forgiving type of join. So don't worry if you've got what I've got going on, a bit of frill. The weight of the blanket will pull it all out, especially as you will be adding a lot more squares than I am for this little video. Or you can, of course, block it once the border and everything else is done and on. So for this next row and for the rest of the body of your blanket, we are going to be doing a very similar thing to what we have just done for this. You're basically going to be repeating this for every row as you go. Now, the only difference is, and what I will show you, is now we're in the main body of the blanket rather than the top or bottom edge, is how we join these corners into this sort of bottom section. But you are going to be coming along, down, across, up, across, down, all the way, and then picking up along the bottom again and repeating that. So this section I'm about to show you, repeating this section again and again and again for as long and for all your squares of the blanket itself. So I'm going to pan back in and show you this all important sort of first, particularly on these first two squares, how you tackle this mid-section join here. And then you should be pretty much good to go for the rest of your blanket. And I can show you just how you finish off before the border. Okay, so you've got your next square that you're going to be joining to. Let's put that loop back on your hook to rotate everything a little bit. Lots of turning involved. So you're going to chain 5, and we're going to join to your next square in the row immediately below, just with a single crochet. So we're just joining that way. Now we're going to do a very similar pick up join as you have been doing along the sides. So chain 1, remove your hook, or take the loop off your hook, sorry, pop it under the chain 3 loop of the corresponding square you're joining to, pull it through, chain 2, skip a stitch, single crochet. So we're going to do this all the way along until you have joined all 13 loops. Now I've got a feeling this square has got too many stitches, so I may have to skip more than one at the end to allow for my 13 chain loops. We'll find out when I get there. Okay, I was wrong. I had the right amount of stitches for this square. I don't know why I felt I had too many, but if I had had too many stitches, I would have skipped 2 of these single crochet. To skip 2 of them rather than just 1 to make room for all 13 loops. Okay, so once you have joined the bottom of your last row to the top of your next row, the way we connect these center points is slightly different for the inside section of the blanket. So chain 3, remove your hook, and you're going to connect diagonally. So this bow square is going to join to the daisy square. The next one that comes along will join to this rainbow square. So all your center joins will be diagonal. So you've got your chain 3, so pop your hook into this chain 5 loop where we joined. So you can see this section here. So this is where you chained 3, joined to this chain 5, and then chained 3, which gives you this section. So you want to go to this one. It's quite a large loop. It will sort of look like the standard chain 5s, even though technically it's chain 3. But this corner space here, you're going into the corner space of the diagonal square. Hopefully I'm not confusing you, and you can see really clearly on your blanket, you've got a corner space here, this main one that we joined to, and then another corner space here. So we're joining to the diagonal, so into this daisy. So I'm going to pop my hook underneath that large chain space, draw this loop through, and chain 3. So I've connected the diagonal here, and then continue down the side, skip the tiny chain space on the square itself, go into that very first stitch, and create your chain 3 loops as normal down the side. So this square actually is fractionally bigger. I'm not quite sure what happened along the top there, but I've got my 13 chain loops, but you can see I'm not actually in that last stitch for that final chain loop. So I'm just going to undo that single crochet and skip 2 stitches instead of 1 to end there. Okay, so I'm going to spin back round again, and I'm going to bring in my granny heart square, which is the next one to attach in the row. Chain 5, and attach to the first single crochet after the chain space on this square. And then we're going to join our 13 chain loops, create and join up to this corner section here. Okay, so that is my final join of my 13 chain loops up the side. And now for the diagonal join, I'm going to be joining to this square here. So pull them apart. That's the chain loop join there. I'm going to be joining to this section here. If you really pull it apart, this is our join here. This is the center space that we're aiming for. So this one here. So chain 3. Put your hook into that corner space. Draw that all through, and then chain 3. And single crochet into the very first single crochet of the next square. And you'll see you've pulled it all together to make this really pretty looped center. So continue joining the top of your chain 3 loops. I'll do a few and then I'll come back and show you that center join in a second. It will be more clear once I've joined a few of these. So you can see your center point here forms this beautiful sort of loops by joining to the diagonals. So you're going to continue this working around, join the diagonal chain loop to the diagonal square, and then when you bring in the next one, join to the opposite square. So I'm going to go ahead and connect my next 2 squares, and I'm going to work right down the edge just as before, and I will meet you back here at the bottom of my final square for this row. Just a note, I have come all the way along joining these middle sections, if I pull these out neatly, joining the diagonals as I go, and I've reached the very last square on the outside edge of my blanket. Now, it's not mentioned in the written pattern, so I thought I would just show you quickly in case you needed that little extra bit of guidance for how to join these corners. We're going to be joining these external corners the same way as you joined them up the top here, and when picking up these bottom loops here, you want to chain 3. Oops, help if I did it in shot. So chain 3, put your hook under that chain 5 space, pull the loop through and chain 3. So that you're connecting, and then you want to put a single crochet in on the stitch around the chain space. So that's how you connect any loops you come across that you haven't, that aren't the diagonals. That's how you pick them up. So I'm just going to continue around. So every time you come to a corner, it's chain 5. Then you spin everything around and go into that first single crochet after the chain space on the square itself. Then continue your chain loops. So you're going to go ahead and do all these bottom ones, and when you get to your hanging loops, chain 3, pop your hook in through there, pull the yarn through, chain 3, attach here. So keep going all the way along, and I'll meet you at the bottom of this bow square in just a moment. All right, so you've picked up all these loops and you have come right across the bottom of your blanket. So rather than just 6 squares, you now have all your squares joined. You've joined the middle squares on the diagonal at the corners. You've picked up any loop on the outside. You've picked up the loops along the bottom. And now there is only one raw side left. So whiz your entire blanket around. And now the last thing to do is we're going to just whiz up this side, pick up this very last loop, come round to here, and we're going to end at this top corner ahead of the border. So let's zoom back in and we can just do this final run on the joining. Okay, so the final raw side, you're going to chain 5, just as we have been, to go around the corners of your square. We want the 13 chain loops up the blank side here. So it would appear on my bow square I have too many stitches along the side. So I'm just going to pop one in here to sort of space it out a little bit. And then we want to be picking up this chain 5 loop here. So chain 3, just as before, pop it into that chain 5, draw the yarn through, chain 3, carry on. So when you reach the very top of your blanket, right back to where you started, you're going to go ahead and chain 5. then slip stitch to that first chain, which counts as your first single crochet. I'm going to slip stitch to join there, but do not cut your yarn. Don't cut your yarn. We are going to need that for the border. So in my next video, we're going to go straight into doing the border for your squares. But for now, I think you've probably all had quite enough of me. And hopefully your flat braid join is solving and sort of working out any inconsistencies with size of your squares, stitch counts. As you've seen, I've had both squares which have had the perfect stitch count, have not had enough stitches, or have had too many stitches. But overall, once they are all joined, you do not notice any inconsistencies whatsoever. So of course, with my absolutely massive squares, they won't all fit in shot, but hopefully you have obviously full blanket size, something that looks a lot like this. Now, as I mentioned earlier, blocking out the other side will solve any sort of ruffles or kinks that you have from where, as you can see, my slight size differences here. If I was to add another row of squares underneath, it'll all pull into line and shape. So blocking at the very, very end is something you can do if you want to. However, I'm not going to bother until I have the border on and wait to see how the whole thing turns out the other side, because if I don't have to block things, I won't. And I certainly don't want to be blocking the squares, then blocking the join, then blocking the border. So I will see you very, very soon, and we can finish up our Unicorn Dreams blanket crochet along with the final video, which is the border. So until then, happy joining. Bye.